Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our panel on incorporating human rights in AI risk management. My name is Min Ong. I am the Accountability and Innovation Manager at the Global Network Initiative, or GNI. So our panel today is set in the context of this. So governments around the world, especially in the EU, of course, are starting to require tech companies to manage human rights risks in the way that they design and indeed use AI. Of course, companies do have AI-specific tools and principles, but sometimes these can fall short of aligning with international human rights standards. So this panel aims to bring together a diverse range of voices from industry, from civil society, and also from multilateral bodies to explore how we can better integrate human rights into AI risk management practices. So perhaps we will perhaps a quick introduction to GNI first. We are a multi-stakeholder initiative. We bring together 4 constituencies, so academics, civil society, companies, and investors for accountability, for shared learning, for collective advocacy on government and company policies and practices which are at the intersection of technology and human rights. And this is particularly relevant when companies face government requests or demands that have an impact on the freedom of expression or privacy rights. So we have a set of principles, the GNI principles and implementation guidelines, which aim to guide companies on how to respond when receiving government requests or demands that may have an impact on freedom of expression and privacy rights, as well as a law on conducting ongoing due diligence and so on. The GNI principles and implementation guidelines do indeed apply to AI insofar as governments produce mandates on AI services in various shapes or forms, and indeed the need for companies to conduct human rights due diligence and, where necessary, impact assessments on AI services. And in that vein, we as GNI have indeed been quite active in a variety of fora related to AI and also activities for our membership. For example, we are members of the OECD AI network of experts, and we've been involved in BTEC's Gen AI Human Rights Due Diligence project. Within the GNI company assessments, we are exploring the intersection between AI and human rights due diligence. We have also obviously put out many statements of concerns on potential rights violations in relation to AI government mandates in Canada and in India, among others. We've also hosted learning discussions among our members on AI as well as government mandates, the last of which was during our annual learning forum, which was held in DC last year. And last but not least, we have an AI working group within the Global Network Initiative, where a selection of GNI members with deep AI experience are, amongst other things, developing a policy brief on government interventions in AI and rights-respecting responses to these mandates. Enough about GNI. Now moving on to our panel. So firstly, we'll hear from 2 company panelists from different parts of the internet stack, so along the theme of diversity, on how they integrate human rights considerations into the development and deployment of AI-related products and services. Secondly, we'll hear from BTEC themselves on multilateral efforts to promote incorporation of human rights in AI governance. And finally, we'll hear the views from civil society panelists on what more can be done by companies and by policymakers, lawmakers, and regulators on incorporating human rights in AI. We'll then have a Q&A, and then I'll provide a summary, and then we will wrap up. All right, so we look like we're on time. So perhaps I'll start with my first request for intervention to Alex Walden from Google. I'll let you introduce yourself in a bit. So Google is obviously an integrated player in the AI ecosystem, for example, developing consumer-facing AI services like Gemini and its predecessors, of course. We also note, of course, that that Google is a founding member of GNI and has a dedicated human rights program and has had responsible AI principles since 2018. And of course, that Google's approach to human rights due diligence is informed by the UN guiding principles as well as the GNI framework. So just a couple of questions, which you may address in any order that you feel comfortable. So I guess firstly, how does Google conduct risk assessments across its footprint, and how do you incorporate that human rights are incorporated in these risk assessments? Mm-hmm. And indeed, looking more externally, how do laws and regulations like the EU AI Act and the AI Basic Act in South Korea influence how human rights are incorporated in your AI risk assessments? And indeed, what advice do you have for other companies to normalize AI risk assessments, human rights within AI risk assessments within their operations? Over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for that question. Thanks, to GNI for putting this session together. I think it's a really important topic. I will try to, I think I can actually get to all of those across a few things. So, the first thing to say, and it may seem obvious, but I do think it's important to point out that actually where companies should start with how you integrate human rights into how your AI work is fundamentally to make sure that the company has human rights governance at its baseline, right? So at Google, we are committed, as you said, to the GNI principles. We're committed to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And what that means for us is that we have a corporate policy that says that these are our values and that we have ways to operationalize these commitments throughout the company. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we're doing it perfectly, but what it does mean is that these are values that are set from the highest level of the company, that they're risks that are reviewed by the board, and that we have a human rights program that works to implement and ensure these commitments across our various products and services. And so having that in place is what allows us to then get to a point where, okay, we also have AI principles on top of that. Our AI principles build on top of our commitments to the UNGPs, our GNI principles, and so the AI principles are really about a single type of technology that we have that's integrated across our policies. Our AI principles, again, reinforce the commitment to international law and human rights. And so that is a reminder to everyone who is doing technical work or who is doing more qualitative trust and safety work or public policy work or legal work across these products that human rights is something we need to be thinking about. And then at the more operational level, because we have this sort of governance structure and these principles integrated, that means that everyone who is in our technical teams, those who are developing AI, are aware that they should be thinking about what rights-related impacts or risks might arise in their work. And so we have to set up processes to address that. And so really it sort of gets... that's, I think, the biggest piece is making sure that you have processes and teams in place to operationalize all of those principles. Those teams are the ones that write the policies to ensure we are thinking about how human rights might manifest in AI and content, or related to AI and privacy, or related to AI and bias and discrimination. All of these things require process and really guidelines. So you just sort of keep getting at the more granular level of what's required, but ultimately human rights has to be at the baseline and then integrated into those processes and frameworks. So we do things like red teaming, or we have the SAFE framework, the Secure AI framework, and that's sort of some coalition work that we do with other companies. All of that embeds the way we think about human rights, but really gets more pragmatic at the operational level for testing and for red teaming, et cetera, to make sure that we are identifying where risks may arise and then giving us an opportunity to remedy those.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. So then we move to perhaps a different part of the technology stack, to the connectivity layer. So the business units of Telenor Group, including DNA, of course, which you're a part of, are responsible for providing connectivity to 200 million people across eight countries. And Telenor indeed has been a member of GNI since 2017 and has been a strong advocate of AI ethics. and uses AI indeed within its network management, customer services, and indeed customer-facing IoT solutions. So if I could pose similar questions to what I posed to Alex, how does Telenor Group indeed conduct AI risk assessments across its footprint, and how do you ensure that human rights is incorporated in these risk assessments, and how does your exposure to the EU AI Act within Europe, but indeed the comparative lack of such laws and regulations within Telenor's Asian business units influence how human rights are incorporated into AI risk assessments, and what advice do you have for companies as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Min, and hello everyone. It's great to be here and talk about human rights and AI, an extremely topical topic currently. And if we look at what Telenor does, I think very similarly what Alex pointed out, that it all comes down to having that top management commitment to responsible AI as well as human rights. So, and that is at the core of what Telenor does. And for example, how we have started building our AI strategy, the foundation of it is really responsible AI. And that's embedded to everything that we do when we develop, deploy AI applications, etc. So I think the top management commitment to that is very important in order for us to actually achieve those goals and promote responsible AI throughout the organization, and actually bring that to the structures and procedures, as also Alex pointed out. What we have done at DNA, for example, is that we have driven our AI risk assessment from our Telenor's responsible AI principles. So actually, those principles guide our risk assessment work. However, of course, AI governance is much more broader topic than that. So of course, we need a lot of more different elements to that besides risk assessment. So for example, awareness and training building, we need to have proper tools in use. We need to work together with, for example, with our vendors and with our stakeholders. And we need to have those policies, guidelines, as well as principles in place. So it's a very it's a very big topic, comprehensive topic, where we need to take into account these different elements. And then if we look at the risk assessments that we do in DNA, we go through very practical level our AI applications and think about the risks very holistically. So we have a very comprehensive view on this. And it has been very rewarding, I must say. I lead that working group myself. And we look at human rights perspectives, we look at impacts on security, privacy, we look at data governance. So we do a very holistic view on AI, and we see that very beneficial also because AI is such a large topic. So this is the way we have built our own program. And if we look at our responsible AI principles, the first one actually is incorporating human rights to our procedures. So that's why it's core at the risk assessment procedures that we also do. Coming into then to the question of EU's AI Act and how to apply legislation when AI Act, as we know, is in EU, but Telenor, as mentioned, we operate also in Asia. However, our values, our policies, our principles, they guide our work, irrespective of which country we are at. So that is also at the core of how we do things. Although a part of AI governance and good AI governance is, of course, to make sure that we are compliant with the regulation, but that's only a part of it. So the company's culture, policy, guidelines, those are the ones that actually guide us and the work that we do. Perhaps also to the last question of what would be my suggestions to go forward, I would come back to the commitment part. So I think that's the important and key element, so that we are actually committed to human rights approach as well as responsible AI, but also the collaboration. So we utilize expertise throughout our organization, and that has helped a lot and also supports our work, and also means that we learn from each other a lot. So these, I think, would be and it's a journey. So this is not a sprint. So it's a journey that we are all in this together, and we learn as we go. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. I see a lot of commonalities in the answers, so that's really great to hear. So perhaps we can move to a different, different actor within the sort of the AI landscape, to Natalie from OHCHR, part of the BTech project. So Natalie, thank you so much for joining remotely. Good to see you. Hope you can hear and see us just fine. We would love to explore, the role of the UN more generally, and of BTech more specifically in this context. So BTech obviously has produced various outputs on the intersection of human rights and AI, right? So most notably, the taxonomy of human rights risk connected to Gen AI, which is produced in November, which GNI was also involved in. So we would love to hear, how do you see the role of multilateral organizations like the UN, like the OECD, and others in ensuring the widespread adoption of human rights in AI risk assessments? What role indeed do you see for WSIS and GDC in promoting this adoption? And last but not least, how do you see the kind of global geopolitical divides on human rights in AI impacting this drive, and what suggestions do you have for companies that are navigating these divides and changes? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. I hope everybody can hear me. And thank you very much for the invitation and for bringing together this panel. And greetings from Geneva. So just a few words about the BTech project. It's a project that was launched by the High Commissioner Office for Human Rights already almost 6 years ago. And really very much with the goal to translate the guiding principle for the technology sector. So we have produced a lot of guidance in very much a multi-stakeholder fashion. So we are working with GNI and with the OECD, and as well with some of the companies through our committee of practice. And I obviously recognize Alex from Google in that space. And just that we are really using the guiding principle as the global standard for business conduct. In that respect, when it comes to the governance of AI, I couldn't miss the opportunity because we have the Human Rights Council now ongoing in Geneva, and we just produced BTech, a report that was mandated by the Human Rights Council. We just show the interest on this topic about the shared responsibility of companies that are developing and deploying AI to respect human rights, as well as the state duty to protect those rights through requiring those companies to respect human rights, as well as to access remedy. So maybe I was thinking to just run you through quickly the latest findings that we have in this report. So obviously we know the key message is that innovation can bring a lot of promises, but as well peril for human rights, especially in terms of the complex human rights challenges that they bring, and some of them because of their unforeseen nature. So the report very much acknowledged the speed and scale of which AI technology are evolving, and that outpace the current regulatory framework. And this obviously raised concern about transparency, discrimination, and misuse, among other. So the report really go into, as I mentioned, the shared responsibility, and we focus a lot on the role of the company. And in that sense, here the guiding principle come as a very useful framework to orientate AI innovation in a responsible manner. So as mentioned, the state has a duty to protect individuals from third-party arms, and that obviously include arms stemming from AI products and services, and the corporation are expected to prevent and mitigate human rights abuse stemming from their AI technology. And of course, there is as well the remedy part, a shared responsibility in that space from both states and company. Now, in terms of Pillar 2 of the guiding principle, human rights due diligence is really the cornerstone of responsible corporate conduct in the AI space. And we have been as well working with the OECD and recognize as well their guidance in that respect. And when it comes how to operationalize this human rights due diligence for companies, the guiding principle use a 4-step process. So step 1 is really very much identifying the potential and actual human rights impact across the whole AI life cycle. And this is really important from the design to the development. And the step 2 is mitigating risk through corporate policies. And we have heard Alex talking about their human rights governance and as well through oversight and targeted actions. The step 3 is that they have to basically track the effectiveness of the action that they have taken and openly communicate the results. So that's the transparency aspect in the human rights due diligence. And step 4 is obviously addressing the range of human rights harm and not just those that are readily and easily measurable. We put as well an emphasis on the fact that for conducting human rights due diligence, companies should prioritize taken action to mitigate harm by the severity, meaning the severity of impacts, which should be judged on the scale and scope and irremediability, and not just by convenience or proximity. And in that regard, regular independent human rights impact assessment involving human rights experts, also with some regional expertise, are key. Bearing in mind as well that the world field of where AI can be deployed around the globe, this is obviously essential. And then throughout the whole process of human rights due diligence, another key aspect is the stakeholder engagement, which will strengthen the human rights safeguard. And here the report draws to few key elements, meaning that this should not be an afterthought, but that companies should really engage stakeholders as co-creator of responsible AI, and that such a dialogue should really happen early and throughout the AI life cycle, that the feedback loops should be closed by explaining how stakeholder input have then shaped companies' outcome, that engagement should really be ongoing. It shouldn't be just a one-off or nor be transactional. And obviously the voice from the global majority should be elevated to really reflect a truly an inclusive perspective. And obviously there is the resource element as well of this stakeholder engagement. Obviously stakeholders should be resourced appropriately so that they can participate. Then the report brings back at the forefront as well the whole business model piece, but I'm not going to go into details here. And what we note in the report in terms of the transparency about corporate practice is that overall they remain weak. There is obviously a growing number of corporate statements on human rights, public disclosure as well about how companies actually apply human rights principles and conduct their human rights due diligence processes, including human rights impact assessment, but that overall remain limited. And obviously, this is especially concerning in high-risk domains, such as surveillance, migration, border control, where there obviously the stakes are high and the possibility exists of repurposing technology, which can lead to severe harms. Then when it comes to the state piece, states should step up in providing guidance and in regulating AI. Both with regard to their own use of technology, and here I would like to draw attention, and I will post it in the chat, to another report presented by the Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which go into states procuring AI and not tech company as well procuring AI technology. So we are seeing now a wave of regulation which are to some extent embedding human rights safeguard. And those have been noted before, the AI AU Act, the DSA, the Korea AI Act as well. Then, I mean, there is as well the whole, in addition to regulation that we are seeing now flourishing, we are as well, should as well think about using for the states some policy incentive that the state can deploy. And that could include embedding human rights in AI-focused industrial policies, as well conditioning public procurement and development finance on right performance, and as well influencing technical standard setting to reflect human rights, particularly through institutions like the ITU. Then the report goes into as well the access to remedy part, which has additional challenges when it comes to the harm created by AI product and services, but I'm not going to go into the detail either. And an important piece as well when we talk about AI governance, and I believe my colleague Ben Pitler might be in the room, and he's leading the BTEC engagement on the role of investor. So I think here we really have to push investors, public and private, to really use their influence to uphold to push tech firms to uphold human rights standard. And there is limited investor awareness, but we see a growing group of investors which are now pushing. So when it comes as well to the question related to other UN initiatives, so obviously WSIS +20, which starts in 2 weeks' time in Geneva, but as well the Global Digital Compact, which has explicitly integrated human rights due diligence as a critical tool to prevent and address human rights, are important processes, and they all converge towards calling for human rights impact assessment in AI policy and practice, and they as well promote cross-sectoral collaboration to operationalize human rights due diligence across jurisdiction. So I'll stop here. I'm mindful of the time, and I will post some resources in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Natalie. Appreciate it. And of course, please do feel free to have a look at the links that Natalie has posted in the chat. They are indeed very useful resources. And for those that are physically in the room, if you go to the schedule page, you'll be able to access the Zoom where you'll be able to see the links as well. Okay, so moving on to interventions from civil society on this topic. Firstly, maybe over to Caitlin. So we've now heard, of course, from our company panelists and then the UN. So Women at the Table joined G and I as a member of our NGO constituency, but of course has long championed gender equality and fairness in the design of AI algorithms. And of course, you have pioneering frameworks like the AI and equality methodology, and as well as your human rights toolbox as well. So from your experience, where do you see opportunities for improvement in incorporating human rights considerations in AI due diligence? What additional sort of mechanisms or incentives do you see or do you think would be useful in existing or future laws and regulations that might help realize these opportunities? And last but not least, what role do you see for global CSOs like yourselves in influencing companies and lawmakers towards this objective? Over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Min, and thank you very, very much for including us in this conversation. We began this journey actually in 2017 with OHCHR and the Women's Rights Division, where we convened. We thought we were just convening several professors from FAFL and ETH and one or two people from OHCHR, but 21 lawyers showed up in this room because everybody was so fascinated with this idea that gender and AI together, what what did they have to do with one another? So that alliance, in a way, has led us to working with EPFL, somebody doing a master's thesis on what these human rights impacts are, and to our creating a methodology that's now been taught. It's taught at Cambridge, Technical University Munich. We work with African Center for Technology Studies in Kenya, which is a Pan-African university, with Chile's National Center for Artificial Intelligence. And the course actually sits on the Sorbonne Center for AI website, which looks at a human rights-based approach to the AI life cycle. We've also taught it at CERN because we found that technologists, of course, want to do the right thing, but they don't really know. Human rights is really quite abstract idea. It's particularly abstract to people from North America who tend to think of civil and political rights as being as the primary human rights, and economic and social rights really not really being part of the larger conversation. People are like, really? Are you sure? Right to health, is that really a thing? So we have this design course, which is really focused on a design course for developers, for data science majors, but now we found that policymakers like it as well. So because it's a conversation, it's a critical analysis. And what we've also found is that a common vocabulary needs to sort of be implemented, because policymakers are even afraid of talking to technologists, and technologists don't really understand what the policymakers want. So we also trying to create a space where people can have conversations, because I think good people want to make this all work for this technology that's all surrounding us. So this starts with a design-based approach, with intentionality, with understanding what an objective is, that actually why are you making a product, actually what is the impact that you would like to have, through to who should the team be sitting around the table. And when we talk about diversity, in this case, we're not only talking about diversity of gender, we're talking geographic diversity, but also multidisciplinary diversity. Where are the social scientists? Where are the human rights experts? Where are the anthropologists? If it's a medical application, where are the doctors, the nurses, who are the people taking the blood? Really, everybody in all the stakeholders in the life cycle of a product, because we're seeing that there's a lot of siloed off invention. And then going through there to data discovery, to understanding whether you actually have the data. We know that for health applications, for example, we've never really discovered the data on women's bodies, no less women of the Global South or people of the Global South. So what does that mean then when you're deploying at scale a health application that actually only has the data for a very, very small demographic, and what are some of the fixes to that? So it's a question of creating awareness and creating a conversation. So that's really what we're focused on. In terms of, and being intentional, and I think the intentionality is really key in the terms of our work. We would like everyone, of course, to expand beyond compliance. So this notion of principles, we tend to think of ethical principles, wonderful, and we love them, but they're very a la carte, whereas human rights frameworks and international human rights law has been agreed by everybody, and as a point of departure, it really is a very good place to start, as opposed to one company's or one academic institution's idea of what really should be foregrounded or not. So we think that that would actually help everybody work towards really kind of systemic rebalance, and maybe even using some of these products to look at the way that these can be positively help instead of just be deployed. We would say that one thing I just want to say is an opportunity where we're also working very deeply and have for some time is on procurement, because we know that all public procurement in particular, because we know that it's a very large part. It's 13% of the EU GDP. In developing nations, it can be up to 30 to 40% of the GDP. These things are being these products are being deployed at scale. And we think that using really interesting AI deployment levers, we would maybe be able to take products that connect people to services as opposed to only detect fraud. So right now we're sort of in a negative part of like how, and we all of us want to save money for our governments and ourselves, but it's also how do we also connect to better quality of life and to services. So we think that that could be a lever of really interesting deployment And indeed, we're working on technical guidelines that, in other words, questions that procurers can ask of vendors from the public sector about, like, oh, are you doing a fairness metric? Right now, if people are asking that, it's just like, check, yes, we did. We know that didn't work with Compass, all of you know. But so which fairness metrics, why did you use that? Did you experiment? Why did you think that was a good idea? And to have these conversations really sort of more deeply before things are deployed. And finally, I'll say we're also working on human rights and AI benchmark, which is going to be sort of the first machine learning benchmark that's dealing with an international human rights law framework, which we're hoping, once it's put on, it'll sit on Hugging Face and other open source platforms, developers, machine learning experts can use to understand whether what they've created really does match with human rights criteria, international human rights law. Thanks.
That's quite an innovation. So very impressive. Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. Okay, so we'll now shortly move on to an intervention from Jalak. But before that, we're just one intervention away from the Q&A session. So for those that are online, I would encourage you to pose your questions already in the chat if you haven't done so already, and we will take the online questions first, in the spirit of ensuring everybody online also feels a part of this, a part of this room. So yeah, then I move on to Jalak if I can. So yeah, Jalak, CCG is a founding member of GNI, and within your work on tech law and policy in the Global South, you've done extensive research exploring different sort of modalities of AI laws and regulations, including a recent workshop that you did on AI and rule of law with South Asian judiciary members back in November. You've also been an active participant as an expert in GPI, the Global Partnership for AI. And of course, the risks and benefits of AI impact the Global South in ways that are maybe sometimes different to the impacts on the Global North, right? So the relative absence of dedicated laws and regulations, maybe there's varying capacity to enforce laws that may or may not exist, different consumer patterns, and perhaps the potential to impact very large populations that may have different levels of AI literacy or indeed digital and media literacy. So the role of, and of course the role of Global South governments in protecting or indeed not protecting user rights will be covered in GNI's policy brief on government interventions in AI that I alluded to a bit earlier on. So yeah, so in your view, when creating local AI laws and regulations, or indeed adapting existing laws and regulations in the context of AI, what can or what should Global South policymakers, lawmakers, and regulators learn from the human rights impacts of companies' emerging AI activities? Secondly, where do you see opportunities to influence the inclusion of human rights in companies' risk management processes and policies in the Global South? And last but not least, taking a very particular kind of Global South angle here, why is it so important for the Global South in general and India in particular? Over to you, Jalak. Thank you.
Thanks, Min. I think, there's a lot of work happening globally on human rights due diligence, risk assessment of AI systems. A lot of it is concentrated currently in what we call the Global North. And I think there may be, there's not enough work that's currently happening in the Global South or being spotlighted in the Global South. And why it's important that that work happens in the Global South is there are different, socioeconomic realities, different societal contexts, but also if a lot of these technologies are being developed in the North, we don't know, they could, have very different implications in the South. They're not being developed and designed keeping in mind those contexts. So I think which really underlines the need for human rights due diligence by companies It underlines the need for human rights risk assessment to be built into governance frameworks that are being designed in the Global South, because that will really allow us to operationally, proactively identify risks, in a methodical way instead of, post facto reacting to harms. And it will also help regulators understand what the harms are and really design governance, regulatory risk mechanisms accordingly. I think one of the things that there's now increasing focus amongst academics and civil society in the Global South is, while at the global level there's been a lot of benchmark development, taxonomy development that has happened, I think increasingly many of us in our contexts are looking at how we can build out more specific benchmarks and taxonomies that more accurately cover the range of risks and harms that arise in our specific contexts. And I think that really is maybe the first step towards enabling an effective human rights due diligence, exercises by companies. Many of our AI companies are global companies. And very often a lot of their staff is, global staff that is not very familiar with local contexts. So I think that's a very key part for academia and civil society in various country contexts to come in and start playing this role of developing benchmarks, taxonomies, but also points to the need for sustained multi-stakeholder engagement between companies and civil society and academia on one hand, so that there can be cross-learning and cross-pollination of ideas, but also with governments as they figure out how to identify harms and conduct human rights risk assessment. I think it's sometimes hard to articulate what risks should be assessed for. And I think, we've been talking about how human rights frameworks provide a great underpinning and starting point for identification of risks. But what I do want to point to is, there is, for instance, there is a lot of heterogeneity within the Global South in terms of what rights are embedded in their constitutions, the extent of embedding of human rights. While it's important to pay attention to human rights frameworks, I think we also have to be strategic about perhaps language we are using and how we are encouraging governments in certain contexts to adopt certain ethical principles or frameworks. And we have to think about how we approach some of these conversations and we frame these conversations so that we can reach the intended outcome and impact that we want. So I think we really have to think about how the other sort of question that has repeatedly come up in the Indian context within which I work is how broadly do you define the risk? If there's too much breadth and too much variety of risks being identified, it can hinder the development of more specific assessment tools and methods, for instance, for algorithmic bias. But if it's too specific, you lose out on the ability to allow a more broad capture of harms that may be arising as these due diligence or risk assessments are conducted. How do you prioritize certain human rights over others, given their mutually affirming character? I think the way a particular service interacts even within the Indian context, within an urban part of India versus a semi-urban part of India versus a rural part of India will differ significantly. So I think even within a particular country context, there will have to be various scenarios that are built out in terms of context that the same technology is being deployed in. So I think there are many, many things to think about as these risk assessments are being designed. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. And that goes back to a point that I raised earlier, that you need culturally and linguistically sensitive staff, and which I mean even within the Indian context, that means in different parts of the country there's people speaking different languages. So you may need staff involved in this that has a multiplicity of perspectives, or to engage with the different challenges that emerge in those contexts. I'll just close up by pointing to 2 points. Risk assessment, human rights due diligence, one of the big criticisms is the lack of enforceability, right? But perhaps that's also where the value is, because perhaps companies are more incentivized to conduct it when they know that there isn't a negative consequence. But I think one of the challenges that we've seen is at what threshold do you ask for risk mitigation to be undertaken? How do you articulate that? And that is a challenge at this moment in time, to specify that threshold. And here I want to point back to the fact that this is where multi-stakeholder conversations and openness become important, but also what is the level of transparency that we expect from companies? What is the level of transparency governments should require in legislation, regulation they're designing? Because until there is a level of disclosure, it's hard to really identify what challenges are emerging and what needs to be articulated more clearly to make this a more meaningful exercise, so that we can really ensure that AI is developing in a way that supports human rights rather than starts to impede it.
Okay, thank you very much for the Jalak. Lots of things to consider to make sure that AI development is context specific and also considers different rights impacts within not only within the global south in general, but also even going in more granular level between urban and rural impacts, perhaps even. Thank you so much. All right, then we move to the Q&A part of our panel. I don't actually see any questions in the chat yet, apart from questions about the links that Natalie kindly reshared. So thank you so much for that, Natalie. Then perhaps moving to the room. Are there any questions from the room to our panelists? Yep, I see one from Ben. Any others? Yep, okay. Richard?
Mike.
Did you have a question too?
Yeah.
Okay.
At IGF, people have to line up.
Okay, great. All right.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please. If you could introduce yourself first and then a question, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Byung-il Oh. I'm from Jimbonet, a digital rights organization based in South Korea. Last year, Korea's National Human Rights Commission released a human rights impact assessment tool for AI, and I was involved in its development. We conducted a human rights impact assessment on the Human Rights Commission's pilot system earlier this year. The process wasn't just about going through a checklist. It involves an exchange of diverse perspective. So we found it very useful. And however, the tool has not yet been widely used, mainly because there is no legal obligation to conduct such assessment. Of course, some companies may conduct internal risk assessment, but independent assessment that include participation from affected parties are rarely carried out. Although Korea passed a basic AI law last year, which includes a provision related to human rights impact assessment, it only states that efforts should be made to conduct them. It does not mandate them. Korean civil society groups are now calling for mandatory human rights impact assessment for high-risk AI system. It would be, I would like to hear the panelists' view on legally mandating such assessment. Thank you.
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So perhaps we can, I would propose having one company intervention at least on the question that was posed, on mandating human rights due diligence for AI, and I guess in the context of high-risk AI perhaps, and perhaps, one civil society intervention at least, if possible. And Natalie, if you want to jump in, please feel free. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to just jump in quickly. I think, if you have human rights governance inside of a company, then you should be doing ongoing human rights due diligence across all of the activity in your company, and that should also apply to your AI work, one. And then two, with respect to sort of regulations to require human rights due diligence, and then specifically for high-risk application areas, we see that with the EU AI Act, and many companies, including mine, have supported a risk-based approach, which does mandate fundamental rights or human rights impact assessment for high-risk application. So I think that's something that you will see a lot of support for from industry.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm really happy for the question because I think that we need to focus basically more on impact than necessarily even risk or harm, but just really say how, from the very get-go, what is the impact on humans, integrate it, as we've just heard it, all the way through the objective and the design, all the way through. As we know in the HUD area, which is the sort of fundamental rights impact suggestion from the Council of Europe, there's going to now be a more formal, I'm sure Natalie will speak to that, more formal, because there is no standardized human rights impact assessment anywhere from any body, sort of international body. But that HUD area really brings, what we've done, we've worked with the Turing who did it, and we've brought the stakeholder part of it really way up front. And I think that that's going to really make a huge difference if you do have this sort of multi-stakeholder consultation, this idea of co-creation really at the get-go. I just want to say two things. I think that we're going to also go to a right to know, ultimately, in terms of the legislation, and that right to know will be the transparency of what the training data is writ large, right, once we get all the IP issues settled. And then the second thing will be the explainability, that really at all levels of society we can kind of understand what's happening with the algorithm, and also potential redress. That's.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Would anyone else like to intervene?
Natalie should talk about their impact assessment.
Natalie, would you like to intervene as well? Perhaps talking about your impact assessment tools.
Sure. Just maybe just to draw, because I didn't really go into the recommendation of the report, but indeed to the colleague representing civil society in South Korea, I would invite him to look at the recommendation we have when it comes to states, when indeed there are regulatory requirements requiring basically a company to conduct human rights due diligence, then there should be as well encouragement that they publish the human rights due diligence and impact assessment that they have implemented, those regulations should as well, as much as possible, request companies developing and deploying AI that they verify the data input and the resulting output to ensure that there is proper representation in terms of gender, race, cultural diversity, and basically safeguards against any negative impact linked to possible discriminatory AI outputs and their consequences. So this is a recommendation in the report. In terms of human rights impact assessment, we had produced together with the great support of GNI as well, and that's part of the resources listed in the session panel, guidance specifically on generative AI, and there is a detailed guidance on human rights impact assessment of generative AI. So I would as well invite colleagues to have a look at this specific guidance that we produce now a bit more than a year ago. Just a comment as well to the colleague on the panel who mentioned India. I wanted just to draw attention that there will be AI summits in India in February. and that's very interesting, precisely in terms of bringing, global majority perspective into the discussion. And it seems from the documents published so far that the focus will be on open, transparent, and rights respecting AI development during the summit. And I think it's very welcome that after countries like the UK and South Korea and France having hosted those past AI summit, that this summit in next February in India, I believe, will be really a good opportunity to possibly, because there was this question asked to me about the geopolitical context as well. I think we have seen as well Brazil developing AI regulation, and so as counterbalance in brackets to the developers in the global north.
Yep, thank you very much, Natalie. Appreciate it. We have 2.5 minutes left, and I think 2 questions. So if we could have the questions together, if possible. Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Richard, please go ahead.
Ringford from BSR. I think while a human rights-based approach is really a necessary prerequisite, many of the really big impacts that AI will have will be more at the societal rather than the individual level. So we're seeing already, for example, shifts in the way education needs to be carried out as a result of generative AI and people's ability to research and learn. It's likely that AI will lead to job displacement or shifts in different jobs. So I'm just wondering whether the panel thinks that those sort of bigger societal impacts or risks can be captured by a human rights-based approach, or whether we need to go a bit beyond sort of the individual human rights-based approach to make sure we fully acknowledge all of the risks that come with AI.
Wonderful question. Thank you, Richard. This is really quite open to anyone. So would anyone like to intervene there?
I can, for example, tell about our approach. That a very good question, I think. Sorry.
Oh, excellent.
Very good question. And how we at least see it is that we need to have a very comprehensive approach at Telenor. And it requires, of course, taking into account the human rights, but it is correct, as you say, that is definitely not enough. So we need to look at AI much more broadly and look at the impacts, what it has, also at the company level, and also educate, train, and build awareness to our employees. So all of these are essential part of, in my opinion, on AI governance.
Yeah, I agree. Just 2 points. I think social media platforms have pointed to the need of societal impact assessment. Secondly, existing human rights are being reinterpreted in group and community settings, like privacy, group privacy, community rights over data. So I think there's also a reinterpretation and broadening of perspective required around human rights in the technology context.
Very much. We have 30 seconds remaining, so I would like to, unless anybody has any last minute must-have interventions, no, I would like to close the panel here. Thank you so much to our panelists for taking part and sharing their views. Thank you so much for those participating online and also for the questions that we received. So yeah, as per the IGF requirements, we will be posting up a summary of this on the related to the session, so please feel free to read there. And with that, I thank everyone again. Appreciate it.